All right, let's try and see if that connection is now up and working with George Ajjan, a Republican strategist. Getting back to the midterms, our top story this hour. George, hello to you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I do.
All right, fantastic. Let's get this show on the road.
Great.
George, the campaign by the Republicans there's been a lot of negative campaigning. It seems the focus has been really campaigning against Barack Obama's record more, some would argue, than actually campaigning on a Republican platform.
Yeah, well, I think that comes straight out of what we're seeing from polling data. There's a great deal of dissatisfaction with Obama's policies, and it's very easy to paint it in a negative light that the Republicans are using a negative campaign strategy. The reality is that Democrats are running from cover from their own president. Obama has been largely absent on the campaign trail. He's made a few appearances in some states, but in the most competitive Senate races, where you have very, very dangerous situations for some Democrat incumbent senators, Obama's nowhere to be found, and they're running as far away from his record as they can, because simply the national polling is showing fatigue with Obama's policies, and I think that's the big story of what's happening today.
So what is it, I would ask you, that bugs you most about Barack Obama's record? After all, the economy has been creating jobs for, I believe it is 55 consecutive months. The economy is growing. That is not the case everywhere else around the world. Some would argue that's a decent record.
Well, the problem is that when you throw around economic statistics, particularly macroeconomic statistics, they often don't match the microeconomic reality. I mean, you can't go to you can't go to the supermarket with the GDP statistics to buy groceries to feed your family. And I think that what the majority of the American people are seeing around the country is that they don't feel that things have gotten better. They aren't satisfied with the changes in healthcare, and they don't see job growth to the extent that they had wanted to. And so there's a lot of frustration with those policies, and the Republicans are capitalizing on that. I mean, this is kind of standard course for a middle of a mandate election, a midterm election. We saw the same thing with Bush in 2006. We'll go back to Clinton in 1994. So I'm not altogether surprised that this is what's happening.
If Republicans do indeed manage to win a majority in the Senate, what happens then? More gridlock in Washington for the next 2 years?
Well, then, Obama has basically two choices of how he can do things. He can essentially cooperate with what the Republicans will want to do, because if they do, in fact, take the Senate, which they're expected to do, that's what all polls and indications seem to be pointing towards, they'll have full control over the legislative agenda, which means that anything that comes to Obama's desk will basically be a Republican proposal. So he either can spend 2 years cooperating with that, or he can just choose to veto as much as possible, which will, I think, negatively impact his legacy. But I think one thing is clear: after tonight, most probably, the Obama agenda is effectively dead. I mean, he'll be a lame duck with, fully controlled opposition in the legislative branch.
And assuming, again, that Republicans win more seats in Congress, how do you see that extending, if at all, to the presidential election 2 years from now?
Well, I think, first of all, it's a good point you bring up the presidential, because that effectively starts tonight. And because you have Obama leaving office, he's term limited, you're going to have a completely open primary field on the Democrat side and on the Republican side. So you prepare yourselves for the most ridiculous and crazy political circus that we've ever seen in history over the next 2 years, because that's exactly what I think is going to happen. On both sides, you have a situation in which you have extreme forces on either side. You have a very divided country under the last two presidents, both Obama and Bush. And so you're going to have very extreme forces competing in those primaries, driving the electorate and pulling them in all kinds of directions. And so you're going to see some very, very interesting and things that we've never seen before, I think, in primaries that are going to come up over the next 2 years.
Yeah, George, as a Republican strategist, aren't you concerned that a part of the American electorate is going to hold this gridlock against Republicans 2 years from now?
Well, there's always a case where the American public holds gridlock against a party that's in power. And if you look at approval ratings of Congress over the years, they continue to go down and down, further and further down. What's important for a party to do, which is what the Republicans, I think, effectively have done this time around. They didn't do it as effectively in 2010, at least in terms of taking over the Senate. They did very well in the House. They didn't do well in terms of taking over the Senate. And the interesting thing about this year for the Republicans, the mainstream Republicans, the traditional Republicans, fought very hard in the primaries leading up to this general election against the Tea Party candidates. So you have more sort of mainstream, milquetoast, kind of standard Republican, center-right candidates running. And so the party has gotten behind them more vigorously than they did in 2010, at least in terms of the Senate. And so, that's been an interesting development this time around. Now, that has left a lot of people in the Tea Party dissatisfied, and which is why I say keep your close eye on what happens over the next 2 years, because you're going to have people from various factions of the party contending for the nomination.
All right, George Ajjan, Republican strategist, thanks a lot for speaking to us.